As eliminated NHL teams from the Stanley Cup playoffs clean out their lockers and meet with the media, there's been more speculation about some moves they might make and lots more decisions to be made for these teams who weren't successful this year. Today we're looking at the Penguins, the Wild, and the Oilers coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at some more NHL trade rumors involving 3 NHL teams, all of which qualified for the 24-team NHL playoff format, but fell short of making it past the qualifying round and into the official first round of the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs. Now, I want to kick things off first with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, we had a good chat about the Penguins yesterday, talking about the possibility of trading goaltender Matt Murray and some other moves they might make, a possible link to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and a potential trade we could see. At least there's been talk of one. Now I want to take a look at some different items with the Penguins. Of course, General Manager Jim Rutherford, who's not afraid to make big moves. He's not afraid to be blunt and really tell you how he feels at times. Has certainly conducted a number of interviews since the Penguins have been beat out. And one thing he did say yesterday, which I was getting ready to talk about here today, was talking about the coaching staff. And he's already made some decisions after this interview that we're referencing here. During this interview, he wouldn't really give a ringing endorsement for Mike Sullivan, but he did say changes would need to be made. So we kind of had the feeling that other parts of the coaching staff would likely be changed and that maybe Sullivan wouldn't be fired, but there was a possibility because he wouldn't come out and flat out say for sure that he was definitely going to be back. But of course, we did find out earlier today that Sullivan will be back next season, but he's going to have a completely new and different coaching staff. They decided not to renew the contracts of assistants Mark Recchi, Sergei Gonchar, and Jacques Martin. Of course, Recchi and Gonchar were longtime NHL players. Gonchar's done pretty well with the defense, but certainly obviously their blue line hasn't been doing the best lately, but they felt that it's time for some new opinions back there and some new people to work with Sullivan. So that tells me that Sullivan's likely going to be on a short leash, and that perhaps if we see them start next season off on the wrong foot and get off on a losing streak, that might be all it takes, or maybe one more year without seeing some improvements or some steps forward could result in Sullivan having his time in Pittsburgh come to a close. Of course, he's had a very successful run with multiple Stanley Cups to his name, but over time, doesn't matter how successful you are, it's all about what have you done for me lately in professional sports. And ever since their last Stanley Cup, things have been slowly going in a different wrong direction, and might be time for a change soon. But for right now, they're going to go with a different group of assistants, and we'll have to see who they decide to bring on board. Now, not to say that those other 3 couldn't potentially take other roles within the organization, but they certainly will not be behind a bench, and they're all without contracts, so there's certainly potential to go elsewhere. Now, one thing I found interesting with Rutherford's media availability as well is he actually kind of came to the defense of Jack Johnson a bit, which I find somewhat surprising. Of course, he is the one who signed him to a 5-year contract not that long ago, back in 2018, and obviously that contract, in my opinion, is really not great. Johnson has been very just not good, I guess is the best way to say it, on the blue line for Pittsburgh. We know Johnson's really good friends with Sidney Crosby, and that may have played a role in their decision to sign him. I don't know, but at the end of the day, it's not a great contract. But Rutherford seemed to deflect a lot of the blame to his defense partner Justin Schultz, and he had more to give. He could have been a better leader out there, and really kind of ripped Schultz and didn't have too many great things to say. Now, of course, Justin Schultz, as we know, is a pending unrestricted free agent, so there's a pretty good chance that we already knew at least that he probably wouldn't be back. If nothing else, for cap purposes, Schultz certainly had a good start to his career with the Oilers. Things kind of fell off a little bit. He got traded to Pittsburgh. Pretty good trade by the Penguins. He got revitalized once he joined their organization. Had a good run there. Was a big part of their last couple of Stanley Cup championships. And now he's battled a lot of injuries, and he's certainly on the decline. But I think he can still be a useful NHL defenseman, but ideally probably in a lower role. Somewhere he can play a little bit less minutes, have a little less responsibility, but still be helpful and productive. He can still be somewhat offensive out there, but defensively, he's never really been his main, strength and forte out there. He's been more known as an offensive guy. So obviously there will be changes to the Penguins' blue line, as I mentioned, but based on Rutherford's talk of Johnson, that tells me that maybe he won't be trading him after all, which I find somewhat surprising. But at the same time, wasn't that long ago, but a year ago, he had a deal lined up involving Johnson. So maybe Rutherford's just kind of pumping his tires a little bit, trying to deflect some of the negative attention off of him to try to get some better value, so other GMs might be more interested in making a deal. I don't know. But either way, it's fair to say that Justin Schultz won't be back after what Rutherford had to say, and we could see other changes to the blue line as well. Now, of course, we already talked about the goaltending situation in yesterday's video, and if you missed that, it'll be linked in the YouTube cards as well. We went into a little bit more depth on the goaltending, and we've talked about that more recently. We don't need to debate whether Murray and Jerry and all that here yet again, but I do think with the Penguins, there probably will be changes to the forward group as well, but it's going to be more of a tinkering than it will be something seismic. I mean, obviously, Crosby, Malkin aren't going anywhere, so I don't think guys like Zucker or Rust are going anywhere. Zucker is a guy who they weren't really interested and hard after for about a year trying to acquire him. So clearly there will be changes, but I think more guys like McCann, Bukestad, more of your bottom six rounding things out will probably be the moves we see in that regard. But more so the blue line, goaltending, and obviously behind the bench, we'll see a different Penguins lineup next year. Now, moving on now to the Minnesota Wild. The Wild are another team that I expect to finally see some more significant change this year. Of course, we know general manager Bill Guerin took over from Paul Fenton in somewhat of a unique circumstance, obviously last year, and Guerin hasn't really done a whole lot. I mean, he has made some trades, but he hasn't really left his mark on his franchise and really have his blueprint stamped on it here as of yet. He did trade Zucker to the Penguins. Of course, that was a pretty significant deal, but I do think we're going to see much more. Now, one thing that he was asked about a lot in a recent interview was about the goaltending situation, and it kind of surprised me in a way that he would be so open about it, but at the same time, not really. But he really did not have too many good things to say about goaltender Devan Dubnyk and his disappointing season. Of course, Dubnyk didn't even really play in the return to play action. They ran with Alex Stalock against Vancouver. Stalock was pretty good considering what, I think he did all right, especially with his level of experience. But at the end of the day, the Canucks beat them out, and they need to get better in that area. But basically, he wouldn't guarantee either one of them a guaranteed roster spot for next year. He kind of said that, Dubnyk has one more year left on his contract. Stalock signed, I think it's 2 more, but Stalock has a much cheaper contract. And they do have a good prospect goalie in the system as well. And they kind of said, maybe the 3 of them will come to camp and compete for a spot. Maybe they'll make a change, though. You never know. Dubnyk would not be a terribly expensive buyout candidate, and he could even be traded with some salary retention as well. He certainly revitalized his career going to Minnesota, had a great run there, but again, like a lot of guys, he's getting to that stage where things are starting to decline. Maybe another team who might be in a different situation with goaltending might take him on at a reduced cap hit to be more of a 1A, 1B, where he doesn't have to carry so much of the workload. I don't know, but it's a possibility. But I would not be shocked to see Minnesota make a change in goal, move on from Dubnyk. It sounds like his days in Minnesota could be over based on what we had to hear from GM Bill Guerin. Of course, he also went on to talk about Captain Mikko Koivu, and if he's going to sit down with him soon and talk about his future, see if he wants to return. Many feel that Koivu likely retires. Obviously, if he does want to play, maybe a 1-year deal is on the table for him, hard to say. But the other big part of the Wild moving forward that they need to get better at, which Guerin addressed here in this media availability, was the fact that they really need a top-end center iceman. And he feels that they're only going to get that through the draft or through free agency. That most times you don't see players like that getting traded. If you're a legitimate 1C, you hardly ever get moved. So it's hard to make that acquisition. And what else are they going to give up to get him? It's going to have to be a significant piece of their blue line, because that's where they have the most strength right now. And clearly that would hurt. Then you'd hurt the back end. So obviously, getting a 1C through trade will be really tough. I'm sure he'll explore it. Getting it where they are in the draft at number 9, probably tough to do. He might be able to get a player there who turns out to be a 1C, but he's not going to be able to get one who's going to be in that role in a really short term. You're probably looking at 3 years out. Somebody who would have to start off lower in the lineup and build it up. Obviously, they have Kevin Fiala, who's been a great piece for them, but they need some more help for him to continue growing this team because they don't have nearly enough offense. So he certainly has a good pulse of what the team needs. And if you look at free agency as well, there's just really not a big-time forward group class out there where he could really say, okay, this guy could be a legitimate 1C or has been a legitimate 1C that he could sign. There's some decent wingers that are very offensive on the free agent market. That there's not a great deal of high-end centers. So Guerin's going to have his job cut out for him. I'm not sure how long it's going to take for Minnesota to really gain in contention here, but they have a lot of moves they can make. Now, I would not be surprised to see Minnesota as well, even though it wasn't mentioned in this interview in this article, that they might explore a Zach Parise trade. Parise is getting, up there in years. Still has a fair bit of time on his contract, though. They came really close to moving him to the Islanders at the deadline, and I know that those two teams are probably going to be revisiting that trade. It was a Parise for Ladd deal. Other parts involved as well, which Minnesota, I believe, was going to be getting a decent prospect, maybe a higher pick too. So clearly it's a deal that we'll probably see revisited, but with the flat salary cap, probably going to be hard. I think there was even a little bit of salary retention. It was a very complex deal involving multiple pieces on both sides. They ran out of time at the deadline, could not get everything agreed to, and we'll see if they come back to that. Certainly going to be interesting, but I do expect GM Bill Guerin to be more active this year and actually put more of a stamp on this team for what he feels going forward, but it's not going to be easy. Could we see him move one of his prized defensemen like a Matt Dumba? I don't think he wants to, but it might be something he has to consider, especially with the expansion draft coming up, and you look at what they can protect. They'd be more likely to protect 8 skaters than they would 7-3-1 because they can only have 3 defensemen back there. They have Ryan Suter. They have Jared Spurgeon signed long term. You've got Dumba. You've got Brodin. It's going to be tough for them to do. Minnesota could be at risk to lose a pretty good player here, and they're going to have to decide as well in that regard how they're best protected for the coming year. Now, lastly here, I want to touch on the Edmonton Oilers. Now, again, Ken Holland's gone through some recent interviews and media availability discussing his team's exit from the playoffs at the hands of the Chicago Blackhawks and what this team needs to do to get better moving forward. Of course, they have a couple of really key pieces to build around McDavid and Draisaitl. They get some good young defensemen as well, but they do have some players who certainly has questionable futures with the franchise, including a player that Holland was very familiar with and acquired at the deadline, and that's former Red Wing and, of course, current Oiler Andreas Athanasiou, who's known for his incredible speed. Thought he'd be a great fit with McDavid. They could keep up. He certainly has scored at a high level before, putting up 30 goals. Wasn't able to recapture that. I know he didn't get a huge sample size in the regular season before the league was shut down and paused. But in this return to play in playoffs and the exhibition game, Athanasiou really didn't look overly great. So there is a lot of uncertainty over his future with Edmonton that Ken Holland may not re-sign him because he is a restricted free agent. He's known to play hardball negotiations before, and right now he's lost a lot of leverage. And there is some talk that Holland could look to move him at the 2020 NHL Draft and maybe try to recoup an extra pick or two. I mean, they did give up 2 second-round picks to acquire Athanasiou, and the recent reports indicate that they feel he could probably come close. That he might not get 2 seconds in return, maybe a second and a third, or something to that effect. Probably at least 1 second. I'm not sure what the other piece would be, or a second and a prospect or something. But he could maybe try to recoup part of what he gave up to get him, and maybe move on. It just didn't seem to be a great fit. We also learned that Tyler Ennis's injury was basically a broken leg at the end of the series there against Chicago. He was badly injured and missed the remaining part of the series, and it looks like he is having a pretty serious injury, so he should hopefully be able to go next year, but it's certainly being a UFA is not a great time to be going through that. There's probably going to be a lot of uncertainty over his overall health and long-term stability that way to be able to play, but he's kind of used to working on shorter-term cheap contracts the last few years anyway, so if the Oilers would like to retain him, that very well might be something that they can do. I mean, he wouldn't be expensive to re-sign, and he did seem to fit better than most of their other deadline acquisitions. I would expect maybe a defenseman like Mike Green doesn't return either, but you never know. I guess Holland could consider signing him on a 1-year deal, but really, if you think about what they had for their back end there, I mean, there's probably room for a defenseman, maybe even 2 to be swapped out if they can make it happen. But I mean, you get Oscar Klefbom, you get Adam Larson, you get Darnell Nurse, Ethan Bear. Those are probably your top 4. I could see them maybe considering a Larson trade. That would not be shocking, but I think Klefbom, Nurse, Bear are there for sure. You've got Chris Russell, who could be a buyout or trade candidate. He's been that way really for a while, but nearing the end of his contract, that's a possibility more than ever now. So if Russell moves on, that probably gives more of a full-time opportunity for a guy like Caleb Jones, who's done well when he's been able to step in and play. They have Philip Broberg and Evan Bouchard waiting. Both of them look like they have promising futures at the NHL level. So really, I don't think we're going to see the Oilers really go out and acquire much for the blue line. I think they're going to go and build around their youth, and this makes a lot of sense, especially with the cap being the way it is. It's going to give them all the flexibility they need. But obviously, until these guys really grow and develop, it might take longer to build them into being a more legitimate cup contender. But at the same time, they have to kind of grow here with what they have to work with. Now in the forward group, you got guys like maybe Kara or Chason could become trade bait. They don't have expensive contracts, but depending on how everybody feels about them, same thing with Riley Sheahan. Well, like they're all players who could stay, but could go to swap things out and try to find something maybe a little bit better to upgrade that group of forwards. But they also have a contract coming up for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to think about. That's going to be tough to do. He would be eligible for an extension. I'm sure they'd love to keep him, but getting that figured out will be somewhat tricky. Of course, you get James Neal. I don't think James Neal gets traded again just because it's going to be hard. He's already been traded once. Finding that right scenario for his contract, probably tough to do. And a buyout, it just links them to him for a super long time with a lot of dead cap space. So I don't see that happening either. So either way, I do expect the Oilers to be somewhat active, but I don't think we're going to see them be as active as some teams that were beat out. I mean, even in goaltending situation, for example, they probably might let go of Mike Smith and find hopefully a stronger backup to Koskinen. I know Smith had his moments of being good last year, but at his age, it's probably best that they find maybe another veteran guy who could pair with Koskinen in the short term until they find that more immediate goaltender of the future, which they do have some interesting goalie prospects in their system, but nobody really close to being ready, I don't think, to take on that full-time role at the NHL level. So certainly let me know your thoughts on what moves we're going to see out of these teams down below in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up, I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.